As a teacher, I try and find ways to allow for different learning styles within a session. However, it's always easy to fall back on just verbal communication. If I'm particularly working with deaf or hearing impaired dancers, and say I'm working through a guided improvisation, it's important to find the best ways that work for them to communicate. So it might be that before the improvisation, you explain what's going to happen so they already understand the process. It might be that you think about where you are in the space, making sure you stay close to them and well lit so they can see you rather than moving through the group. You might also think about having a physical gesture, so maybe you put your hand up or give a little wave before you give the next lot of information, so they know that they can stop and watch you and lip read before they then continue dancing. You might also think about finding other ways to communicate the information. So if you're using imagery rather than talking about it, maybe you bring in pictures or a prop that they can feel. Equally, you might choose to try working kinesthetically. So through touch, it might be that maybe you get into partners or small groups and use different kinds of touch to initiate movement. When leading a dance session, the amount that you choose to demonstrate different movement translations or variations really depends on the situation. If you're working with maybe a less experienced dancer who might not have the confidence or the body knowledge to find their own translations, then you might need to be quite specific about your ideas for how to translate movement, and demonstrating them even when you're doing the full exercise will also help them to remember and follow the exercise. However, if you're working with quite a mixed group where everyone in the group has their own or needs their own variation, then it's impractical to demonstrate each different possibility for the movement. So then you might think about a different way to introduce the movement. You could use open language. So for example, instead of saying plie or bend in the knees, you might simply say melt, and then allow the dancers in the group to find their own variation. You might suggest that they choose a different body part or a different way to interpret it. If you have a group with more experienced dancers, then you maybe don't need to do as much demonstrating. What can be really useful is that you show or you explain what the purpose of the movement is, how it should feel, or what you should gain through it. And that will help the dancer to find their own variation. Remember that it can be quite intimidating if you're the only person who's doing a different move in the group. So trying to create an atmosphere or an environment where people feel confident to be doing their personalised variation of the movement can be quite important. And that counts for everyone in the session, because actually everyone is going to look slightly different. Finding the most effective or appropriate translation often happens through a process of conversation. So as the dance leader, you bring your dance knowledge and what you're trying to achieve. And as the dancer with a different body, they bring their own body knowledge of how they work and what their movement potential might be. Remember also that sometimes variation is not just about the shape of the movement or what it looks like, but it might be to do with timing. So maybe you might need to do 2 different speeds and have a faster version and a slower version. It might be that you find a group timing together, take the timing from the dancers, or allow for each dancer to find their own personal timing. There are many different ways to approach translation or finding movement variations. Remember that translation doesn't always have to happen just in one direction. It's not always from a non-disabled body onto a disabled body. It can happen in the other direction. And sometimes translating back and forth between different bodies means you find a more interesting translation or something more detailed within the movement. As a teacher, it's really good practice to think about the different dances that you have in your session when you're planning. So you might think about a specific dancer and a particular skill or learning style that they have, and create an exercise or task that's specifically aimed towards them. And then throughout the class or the term, you may focus on different dancers. And then the other dancers in the group may then have to translate or find their way through the exercise. Obviously, as a dancer with a non-typical body, with a diverse body, there are likely to be more occasions when you're having to translate movement. However, I think it's really important for dancers with a typical dance body to also be given the tools to translate. It gives them the experience of having to really think about their own body and finding their own variations. They then, through this skill, they become more of a thinking dancer, more in tune with their body, rather than a dancer that just mimics or recreates the shapes from their teacher.